One of the biggest mistakes people make in astrology is assuming intensity means destiny. Some relationships change your life forever, but not every life-changing relationship is healthy. In this video, I'm going to talk about the difference in synastry when it comes to trauma bonds versus soulmates and how that shows up in aspects in a synastry chart, okay? So just because sometimes what feels fated, it could actually be a trauma bond. Sometimes the relationship that is consuming you emotionally is not actually your soulmate, but more so your nervous system recognizing chaos. So today I'm going to talk about astrology of trauma bonds versus actual soulmate connections in synastry, because these two relationship types can feel very similar in the beginning, but then they leave completely different emotional footprints behind. So let's go ahead and get into it. Trauma bonds and soulmate connections both feel emotionally significant. They feel magnetic, almost impossible to let go of. Both can completely alter your sense of self, but it's the quality of the connection, especially as it plays out, that's different. Soulmate connections usually create emotional expansion, growth, usually end up being more of yourself or even better on the other side. Versus trauma bonds create emotional addiction, insecurity, making you feel more unsure of yourself. You kind of feel like your compass in life to know what direction to go to afterwards is kind of lost because you have to rebuild your sense of self again. So one helps you become more yourself and the other one makes you emotionally dysregulated. And astrology reflects this difference very clearly once you stop looking at synastry as good aspects versus bad aspects. And also, too, you have to, a little small disclaimer, you have to keep in mind that even if you have the best aspects with someone, that does not necessarily mean you know how they're going to be in real life, how they're going to play out, so on and so forth. So, because even difficult aspects can exist in healthy relationships, and that's something that I've learned too. Just because you have squares and opposition and stuff like and those types of aspects in your synastry chart, that does not necessarily mean that it's a bad toxic thing. It could just be a dynamic that you all have to play out to learn more about yourselves and each other. So the real question is, does the relationship create emotional safety or emotional survival mode? Let's start with Pluto, because Pluto aspects are some of the most misunderstood in synastry because people romanticize them constantly. These contacts can create obsession, fixation, psychological attachment, power struggles, jealousy, and emotional dependency. The aspects I'm talking about are Moon square Pluto, Venus square Pluto, Mars square Pluto, and if Pluto is conjunct to any personal planets with a tight orb. These relationships can feel hypnotic, like the person gets under your skin. You think about them constantly. You analyze everything that they said, that they did, if there was any meaning in like the micro things that happened between you two. Their attention feels intoxicating. But the thing is like you get so caught up in their web that you get stuck, and then now you feel like prey that's about to be preyed on. That's what it feels like when there are hard Pluto aspects between two people. Because emotionally, you may not actually feel safe. Even if you feel intoxicated, drawn in, and all the things, you don't feel safe with this person. Pluto relationships often trigger fear of abandonment, control issues, emotional testing, possessiveness, or emotional extremes. So this relationship becomes emotionally consuming when we consider any hard aspects with Pluto. Another aspect or another kind of aspect to look at is Mars and Neptune. So Mars square Neptune is a big one because it can create confusion between fantasy and reality. You got to remember Mars is your sexual energy, your physical present, your drive for life. And then Neptune is illusion, things that are foggy, confusion, things that don't make sense. So if someone has Mars square Neptune in synastry, one person could project onto the other very heavily, for good or bad. The chemistry can feel spiritual, cinematic, transcendent. It almost feels like a movie, you know? But also deeply destabilizing, and that's the biggest thing, because there could be mixed signals, avoidance, emotional inconsistency, savior-victim dynamics, sexual confusion, and emotional escapism. So you kind of have to think of it like the way that someone might pursue someone or the way that someone goes about something might be confusing to the other person. So, you feel emotionally intoxicated but unclear, like I said. And honestly, a lot of twin flame relationships, astrologically, are actually heavy Neptune-Pluto relationships for sure too. I feel like whenever you have any hard aspects with Neptune, it's just very hard to see the relationship clearly. And honestly, if you can't think clearly, it's very hard to make a good decision about love, you know? Because love is not just about, love relationships are not just about the heart, but it's also about the mind too and the logic. And they both have to be in line with each other for it to be a healthy relationship, not just a trauma bond, right? And then you have Venus and Saturn. So Venus is, love, taste, music, the things that make me comfortable, the things that make me feel beauty. And then you have Saturn, which is very much like father time, eat an apple day, keep the doctor away energy. So Venus square Saturn or Venus opposite Saturn can create attachment through emotional deprivation. The love feels conditional, because if it was a more positive Venus and Saturn, whether it's like trine or sextile, it gives this impression like, oh, we could do love long term. This is a sustaining love that I could do for a long period of time. If we work at it, our love will be that much richer. On the other hand, this is when you have the square or the opposite, one person constantly feels not chosen enough, not reassured enough, and emotionally starved. But the inconsistency makes the attachment stronger, and that's the interesting thing. It's not like Venus trine Saturn, where they just naturally, someone is able to, you don't even have to prove love. They just, with them showing up every day after day, year after year, decade after decade, they have love that person. But in this sense, it's like the inconsistency of not showing up, and not truly loving that person the way that they love, that makes the attachment stronger. So the nervous system starts chasing validation. That's not soulmate energy, that's intermittent reinforcement. Soulmate connections usually feel emotionally grounding first and intense second. That's the difference. Healthy soulmate synastry often has moon trines and sextiles, Venus-Moon harmony. The way I feel and the way you love is at harmony. Supportive Saturn, because you need that stability, that commitment, reliability, and longevity. Not just the chemistry, right? The Sun-Moon compatibility is important too, because the way I am and the way you feel, you want that to be in harmony and not at odds in a relationship. And then emotional consistency is also important too. So what you'll see with moon aspects is that moon harmony is huge, because when someone's moon supports your moon, your Venus, your sun, aka how you feel, how you love, and who you are, you feel emotionally understood without constantly fighting for connection. You can relax. You don't feel addicted to reassurance. You're not on an emotional roller coaster, right? You don't feel emotionally confused all the time. And honestly, soulmate connections are usually quieter than trauma bonds in the beginning. So that's why, when you'll hear that like cliche or trope where someone says like, oh, he's boring, she's boring. Sometimes that might not be a red flag. That might be a yellow, maybe even a green flag if someone's boring, because chaos is loud, safety is quieter. And then you also want a healthy Saturn, because healthy Saturn aspects feel like I want to build with you. I take you seriously. I will show up for you every day. I care about your future. I want to protect this connection. Saturn without emotional warmth can feel cold though. It can feel very like, we're going to shut off your lights if you don't pay your electricity bill, right? That's Saturn too. It's very much like real world cause and effect. But if Saturn also is healthy in the way that there's warmth in that, especially if you mix it with Venus, Moon, or Sun harmony, it creates relationships that actually survive real life. So the biggest difference between trauma bonds and soulmate relationships is that soul bonds make you obsessed with the relationship. Soulmate relationships make you feel more connected to yourself. One creates emotional fragmentation, and then the other creates emotional integration. And after the relationship ends, the aftermath tells the truth. How do you feel after you're no longer with this person? Are you better after because of the relationship? Or are you feeling worse off that you have more work to do after the relationship? That's the biggest sign. Because trauma bond endings usually leave emotional withdrawal, nervous system dysregulation, obsession, identity confusion. You feel like you might not know who you are anymore, and emotional exhaustion of always being on that roller coaster but never knowing where you stand. Versus soulmate relationships, even if they end, they usually leave in growth. And yes, both trauma bonds and soulmate relationships, if they end, can create pain, but there's also a sense of clarity, and like I said, more importantly, the growth, right? So astrology is not about labeling someone good or bad. It's about understanding the emotional dynamics you're participating in. Because you could have great chemistry with them, but that does not necessarily mean that you're compatible. Things can feel intense, but it might not necessarily mean love either. And sometimes the relationships that teach us the most are the ones that force us to learn the difference. So, with that being said, let me know in the comments, what synastry aspect do you think creates the strongest emotional attachment? And if you want me to break down more relationship astrology, celebrity synastry, or toxic versus healthy aspects, let me know. Thank you for listening, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.